right, so it looks like we're pretty close to done with this application. Everything's laid out for us properly. We can start using our UI here and start changing some aspects of how this halftone component renders. Let's change to squares, and let's change the size and do some inversion, do some color changes. We can also change the image here. So most of this is done, but there's a couple features that we just haven't implemented yet. So let's start with the ability to change the halftone color or the background. The background is not wired up yet. So now to implement the background color changing, we do have to actually implement a background. And so let's head over to our application HTML, our app.html file. Inside our halftone component here, we can add a div. And this is a slot. You might remember, like, for example, on our floating header, we have a spectrum button, and inside the button, we have a spectrum icon, and we're calling it a slot. This is a named slot. It's named an icon. So our button knows how to handle something that's been added to the icon slot. On the other hand, our halftone SVG, it only accepts one type of slot. So when this component was created, it doesn't accept named slots, it just accepts a slot. It only accepts the one thing, but it knows how to deal with this one thing. And all this halftone component is doing is it's just sizing the background according to what it needs to show as a background. And of course, being a slot, we can control it however we like. So we can set the style on it. We can set some CSS properties on it. And we're going to do that with a background color property. And if we go over to our application component logic here, our app.js file, you can see that we've already snuck a background color property right into our constructor here. And it's also a reactive property. So this should work pretty much right away. Now, before we get it working, we do have to help it out a little bit and make it take up the entire width and height of the size with our CSS. So this is app.css. But now that we do that, this should work pretty well, and it does. Now let's go to our side panel HTML again. As we send the event for the color that's coming from our color slider and color area, we do want it to pick and choose, is the property going to be the halftone color or is it going to be the background color? So let's add that in right now. So this looks a little complicated as I'm adding it in. So all it's saying is send an event, and if the color tab equals halftones, if the selected tab equals halftones, then the property name that we're going to send is halftone color. Otherwise, it's going to be the background color that we're sending. And it's the same thing down here in the color area. And we're going to make the color value follow the same logic. So if the color tab is halftones, then we're going to feed the color slider a value of the halftone color, and otherwise it's going to be the background color. And of course, same for this color area right here. And as a last step, let's give our color tab an initial value. And with that, I think our tabs should be working now. So it's initially selecting the halftone tab, and we can change the green halftone to something else. And now let's switch over to the background and change our background color. And it's all working. This is great. So now the other thing I'm a little concerned about is as we resize our browser window here, we're cropping our halftone generator component. I don't want to do that. It should have enough logic to resize itself, but it needs a little help. So if we go back to app.js, our main component logic, I'm going to add a few lines of code here. We're going to grab a reference to our halftone SVG component, and we're going to add a Resize Observer. So we're putting in place a mechanism to watch the halftone component. So as it gets smaller and bigger, we're observing the size change, and then our Resize Observer, whenever it gets resized, we're calling resize on the halftone component, and we're also calling render on the halftone component. Now these two functions, these are custom functions inside the halftone component just to force it to do what we need it to do, but it should all work. And this is part of the reason why I'm using this first updated method in the first place, because I have no great place to put this. There's some new stuff in Lit 2 though, called reactive controllers, and I believe they could work super well for this. So now let's just try resizing this window and hope it works. And here we go, it's working super well. And the next thing I want to do is this button to upload your own image should do something. And when I say upload, I don't mean to the cloud or anything. I just mean local in your browser. So let's head over to floatingheader.html. And we just need to add a change event to this button here. And so it's going to dispatch an event called upload. We're going to put this upload listener right here, right in line with our HTML. And we're gonna do something here. So we're gonna get a file input element by ID and then click it. And this is kind of weird, but it's kind of how you upload files. So we're adding this input element here right at the very end, and it doesn't really matter where we add it because we're not gonna see it, display of none. And it's going to, once we click it, which is what we're doing here, we're clicking it programmatically with JavaScript when this upload event happens. We're clicking it, and it's going to pop open a dialog. And when you accept what files you want to choose from that dialog on your local system, it's going to issue its own change event. And we're going to call onLocalImage with this. So let's fill out that function right now. So back in our app.js file, in our application component logic, we'll add that onLocalImage function. And what this is going to do, it's going to take the first file it gets from that dialog box, from that change event, and it's going to create an object URL out of it. And this is going to be a long, I think it's base64 encoded string. And so we can just set that string to our image property that, again, this is our image property. So our image can either be just a relative path here, or it can be this long base64 image. So I think that should work. Let's try it out. As we click this button, it's going to fire an upload event down to the main application. And the main application is going to trigger this hidden input field. And when it does that, it calls click programmatically on it. And so here we have a nice little dialog box, and I'll select the image that I found online, and we're going to open it up or kind of upload it. And there we go. That's our image. So it worked just fine. Now, the very last feature we need to add, and it's in this app.js, our application component logic, is saving our image. So let's add a function, and I'll kind of hand wave my way through this. I don't want to get too caught up in how this all works. We're going to add a save as function, and we're going to call this function for each image type. So SVG, PNG, and JPEG. So what our save as function does here is it creates a new anchor tag. It allows it to be downloadable. And then the href of that tag contains some kind of data. And the data depends on if it's an SVG or a bitmap. If it's an SVG, we can actually get the SVG as a function of the halftone component, the raw SVG. And if we're downloading an SVG, all we have to do is escape that a little bit and put a header in front of it and make that the href attribute on our tag. If it's a bitmap, on the other hand, we have to take that SVG and render it to a canvas, and then scrape the pixels off that canvas and save that as a PNG or JPEG. So now hopefully this all works. Let's first try saving as SVG. And as you can see, it created a file at least, so that's promising. I'll create another tab here, and we'll try to drop this SVG in. And it works. So let's try this with a PNG. And it worked again. This is great. So basically, these are all the functions we need to make this a complete application.